Francis Ngannou, from sand mines to heavyweight champion. Francis Ngannou's story isn't just about fighting, it's about survival. Born in the small village of Bati, Cameroon, Francis grew up with nothing. His parents divorced when he was 6, and by the age of 10, he was working in sand mines. A child with a shovel, digging under the sun for scraps of money to help his family eat. School wasn't an option. Food wasn't guaranteed. And when he spoke of wanting something bigger, people laughed at him. They told him to stop dreaming, that boxing wasn't for someone like him. At 22, Ngannou made a decision that would define his life. He left everything behind to chase a future in Europe. But this wasn't some easy flight. He had no passport, no money. He crossed borders crammed into cars, walked for days under scorching heat, went without food, without water. He later admitted that at one point he drank his own sweat to survive. Many in his group collapsed along the way. Some never made it. 6 times he tried to cross from Morocco into Spain. 6 times he was caught and sent back. On the 7th attempt, he made it in a small raft through one of the most guarded borders in the world. For that, he was thrown into a detention center for 2 months. When he finally reached France, things didn't suddenly get better. Francis was homeless in Paris. He slept in parking lots. He had no job, no language, no family, just a body hardened by labor and a dream that refused to die. One day, he walked into a small gym. He told the coach, Fernand Lopez, that he wanted to box. Lopez looked at him and said, "Why not MMA?" That gym became his lifeline. They gave him food, a place to sleep, and the tools to finally channel the strength he had carried his whole life. By 2013, he fought his first MMA match. By 2015, he was signed to the UFC. His rise was meteoric. The same man who once dug sand with his bare hands was now putting heavyweights to sleep with one punch. In 2021, he fulfilled his dream. Francis Ngannou knocked out Stipe Miocic, the greatest heavyweight in UFC history, to become champion. From the mines of Cameroon to the top of the fight world. Sean Strickland, from abuse to champion. Sean Strickland's story doesn't start in a gym, it starts in hell. Born in Anaheim, California, Sean grew up in a house filled with violence. His father was abusive, his mother terrified. From as early as elementary school, Sean believed his dad was gonna kill her. He would crawl under her bed at night, hiding there with tears in his eyes, waiting for screams, convinced that was how it would end. One night, it nearly did. His father's rage exploded and Sean, just a boy, snapped. Crawling out from under the bed, he grabbed a guitar and swung it over his dad's head. Then he bolted outside to call the cops. But the next day, his mother bailed the man out. That was Sean's reality, survival inside his own home. And it didn't end there. His grandfather, a bitter old man, dragged him down a darker road. Sean admits that as a teenager, he was fed neo-Nazi ideology, supremacist rhetoric that gave his anger a twisted direction. For a time, he wore it like armor. He's said openly that fighting and the diverse people he met through it was what broke that cycle and pulled him out. By 14, Strickland found MMA. The cage became his therapy, a place to pour every ounce of hate, confusion, and rage. It gave him purpose, something to chase that wasn't destruction. At 17, he turned pro. By 2014, he was in the UFC. Even then, the scars never left. Strickland is brutally unfiltered, often controversial, sometimes offensive. But it's not a gimmick. It's the raw product of what he lived through. And in September 2023, the boy who grew up hiding under a bed, convinced his mother wouldn't survive the night, stood under the lights of Sydney, Australia, and beat Israel Adesanya to become the UFC middleweight champion. Sean Strickland isn't polished. He isn't clean cut. He isn't supposed to be here. But that's why his story matters. Because for him, fighting wasn't just a career. It was survival. Nate Diaz, Stockton's son. Nate Diaz never needed a belt to be a star. His story was never about gold. It was about survival, defiance, and being unapologetically himself. Born in Stockton, California, Nate grew up in a rough neighborhood with his brother Nick. Their mother worked multiple jobs to keep the family afloat. The Diaz brothers were latchkey kids, often left to their own devices. What they found more than anything was fighting. At 11 years old, Nate followed Nick into a jiu-jitsu gym run by Cesar Gracie, but it wasn't the easy path you'd imagine. Money was tight. The Diaz brothers didn't have the cash for training fees, so they cleaned mats, did odd jobs around the gym, and sometimes just showed up and hoped Cesar wouldn't kick them out. Outside the mats, life wasn't much easier. Nate has said he struggled in school, often drifting in and out of classes, uninterested in anything except training and fighting. What kept him going was Nick. His older brother was his mentor, his protector, and his compass. If Nick was going to be a fighter, Nate would be too. By 19, Nate was fighting professionally. In 2007, he entered The Ultimate Fighter Season 5. That season would change everything. Nate won the show with a slick triangle choke, instantly putting him on the UFC map. But even then, his career wasn't smooth. Between 2009 and 2011, losses piled up. Gray Maynard, Joe Stevenson, Rory McDonald. His record looked uneven. Casual fans didn't see a star, but hardcore fans did. They saw Stockton's sons for what they were. Real. The middle fingers in the cage, the endless cardio, the trash talk that wasn't rehearsed. It was just who they were. And then one night in Orlando, everything changed. December 2015, Nate Diaz dismantled Michael Johnson with crisp boxing and relentless volume, but it wasn't the fight that lit the fire. It was the mic after. Conor McGregor, you're taking everything I worked for, mother. I'm gonna fight your thing. It wasn't a call out, it was a moment. Just months later, opportunity knocked. UFC 196. Rafael dos Anjos pulled out. Conor McGregor needed an opponent. Nate Diaz stepped in on 11 days' notice, up a weight class, against the sport's biggest star. He weathered the early storm, ate McGregor's left hand, then stunned him with his own shots. When Conor shot for a desperate takedown, Nate wrapped his neck and squeezed. The tap heard around the world. I'm not surprised, mother. That line made him immortal. The rematch at UFC 202 only cemented it. 5 bloody rounds ending in a razor-thin decision for McGregor. But by then, it didn't matter. Nate Diaz was a superstar. He disappeared for 3 years, but when he returned against Anthony Pettis in 2019, the crowd reminded everyone Stockton hadn't been forgotten. That set the stage for the BMF title fight with Jorge Masvidal at Madison Square Garden, an event built not on rankings, but on Nate's aura. He never wore UFC gold. He never cared to. Nate Diaz became something bigger, a people's champion. A fighter who smoked on stage, flipped off opponents, and fought anyone at any time. Conor McGregor from plumbing to the pinnacle. Before the suits, the whiskey, and the headlines, Conor McGregor was just a kid from Crumlin, Dublin. Born in 1988, he grew up in working-class Ireland, where the streets were rough and dreams were small. Conor wasn't destined for sport at first. He picked up soccer, then boxing as a teenager to defend himself from bullies. But what really pulled him in was mixed martial arts. By his late teens, he was training at Straight Blast Gym under John Kavanagh, back when MMA in Ireland was still a fringe curiosity. Life outside the gym was harder. His family pushed him into a trade. Conor became an apprentice plumber, waking up before dawn, working long shifts, and coming home caked in dirt. He's said many times he hated every second of it. You're up at 5 a.m., you're in traffic, you're working all day. For me, it wasn't life. I felt like I was dying inside, so he gambled. He quit plumbing. He doubled down on fighting. That decision meant poverty. He lived off welfare checks, 188 euros a week, while chasing a dream that seemed impossible. He told his girlfriend, Dee Devlin, he'd be champion one day. For years, she carried him through, financially and emotionally, when the dream looked more like delusion. In 2008, he made his pro debut. By 2011, he was already Irish featherweight and lightweight champion. He fought in small halls in front of tiny crowds, collecting knockouts that started building his legend. His left hand was surgical. His trash talk was different. The swagger was real. The call finally came in 2013, the UFC. His debut against Marcus Brimage lasted just 67 seconds. He called for a $60,000 knockout of the night bonus on the mic, and got it. In Dublin a year later, he destroyed Diego Brandao, electrifying the hometown crowd in a moment that felt like the birth of a star. From there, the rise was meteoric. Dustin Poirier knocked out in under 2 minutes. Dennis Seaver dispatched with ease. Chad Mendes on short notice for interim gold. And then Jose Aldo, the pound-for-pound king, unbeaten for a decade. 13 seconds. One punch, world champion. In 2016, he did what no UFC fighter had ever done. Became a 2-division champion, holding belts at featherweight and lightweight simultaneously. He was larger than life, bigger than the UFC itself. Pay-per-views broke records. Press conferences turned into global spectacles. His rivalry with Nate Diaz redefined what a fight promotion could be. But Conor's story is more than gold and glory. It's about reinvention. The plumber's apprentice who walked away from the safe path, bet bet everything on himself and, through pure force of will, became the face of a sport. Love him or hate him, Conor McGregor is proof of one thing: charisma, belief, and violence can carry a man from nothing to everything. Jorge Masvidal, street fighter to superstar. Jorge Masvidal's story starts in Miami. Born in 1984 to a Cuban father and Peruvian mother, his dad had fled Cuba on a homemade raft, eventually finding his way to the US, but trouble followed. When Jorge was just 4 years old, his father was arrested on drug trafficking charges and sentenced to over 20 years in prison. From that point on, it was just Jorge and his mom, scraping by in a tough Miami neighborhood. School never stuck with him. Jorge spent more time fighting in the streets than in classrooms. When his mother's beat-up Toyota broke down, Masvidal would sometimes crash in it, treating the car as a second home. By his teens, fighting wasn't just a pastime, it was survival. That's when the backyard fights started. Before there were bright lights and pay-per-view buys, there were grainy handheld cameras capturing Jorge throwing hands in Miami backyards. He fought bare knuckle for cash, sometimes against men twice his size. The videos went viral before viral even meant anything. That was Jorge Masvidal's first audience. But raw talent needed structure. Jorge found it at the Freestyle Fighting Academy, where he learned the fundamentals of MMA. By 2003, at just 19 years old, he was making his pro debut. Wins piled up on the regional circuit, and he quickly built a reputation as a fearless brawler who would fight anyone, anywhere. He fought in Strikeforce, he fought in Bellator, he even challenged Gilbert Melendez for the Strikeforce lightweight title in 2011, losing by decision but proving he could hang with the elite. By 2013, Masvidal was in the UFC. His early run was solid but uneven. He beat names like Donald Cerrone, but losses to Benson Henderson and Demian Maia kept him from breaking through. For years, Masvidal was a respected veteran, tough as nails, skilled everywhere, but not a star. That all changed in 2019. First came Darren Till in London. Masvidal was the underdog, but he slept Till with a brutal knockout. Then came the infamous backstage incident. 3-piece and a soda, when he pieced up Leon Edwards mid-interview. The clip went everywhere. Overnight, Jorge Masvidal was more than a fighter. He was a meme, a persona, a headline, but the moment that etched his name in UFC history came just months later. UFC 239, Ben Askren, 5 seconds, a flying knee, the fastest knockout in UFC history. Masvidal sprinted across the octagon, collided with Askren's skull, and sent him stiff to the canvas before the crowd could blink. Jorge celebrated with a mock corpse pose. A viral moment turned into legend. That run carried him to headlining Madison Square Garden against Nate Diaz for the made-up BMF belt. It wasn't about rankings, it was about aura. Masvidal won by doctor stoppage, and the belt was wrapped around his waist by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson himself. From sleeping in cars to Hollywood handshakes, Masvidal had arrived. Kimbo Slice, the Backyard King. Before he was Kimbo Slice, he was Kevin Ferguson. Born in the Bahamas in 1974, raised by a single mother in Miami, he grew up tough and poor. His first real fight came at 13, standing up for a friend in a schoolyard. From that moment, violence was part of his identity. In high school, Kimbo was a standout linebacker with legit potential. He even earned a football scholarship to the University of Miami, sharing the locker room with future NFL players. But life unraveled fast. Hurricane Andrew hit in 1992, wiping out his family home. Kevin ended up living out of his old Nissan, his football career derailed by poverty and instability. From there, it was survival mode. He bounced between odd jobs, strip club bouncer, bodyguard, even a limousine driver. But what made him infamous wasn't the jobs, it was the street fights. Armed with nothing but his fists and an aura that terrified anyone in front of him, Kimbo fought bare knuckle in backyards, driveways, and parking lots. Grainy VHS tapes and early YouTube clips of him dismantling opponents spread like wildfire. His beard, his presence, the sheer brutality of his knockouts. Kimbo Slice became the first viral MMA fighter. Before the sport itself had even gone mainstream, the internet made him a legend. People who had never watched MMA knew Kimbo. To them, he was the baddest man alive. His aura was so powerful that when Elite XC launched on network television in 2008, they made him the centerpiece. He headlined CBS cards, pulled massive ratings, and introduced MMA to casual fans who didn't care about belts or weight classes. They just wanted to see Kimbo fight. But when the lights shifted from backyards to the professional cage, reality hit. Skilled fighters exploited his weaknesses. In 2009, he entered The Ultimate Fighter, bringing record-breaking ratings to the show. He won one fight in the UFC before fading from the promotion, but even in defeat, his star power never dimmed. After a short run in boxing, Kimbo returned with Bellator, fighting in front of millions again. His fights weren't technical masterpieces, they were gritty, raw spectacles, just like the man himself. Mark Hunt, the Super Samoan. Mark Hunt's story begins in South Auckland, New Zealand, born in 1974 into a large Samoan family. But behind the walls of his home, life was brutal. His father was violently abusive. Mark and his siblings were beaten so severely that they often missed school for weeks. The punishments were savage. Belts, broomsticks, even metal rods. In his autobiography, Hunt described being tied up and whipped until strips of skin peeled from his back. As horrific as it was for him, he said his sister endured worse. She was locked in rooms for days, beaten until she couldn't walk. The scars of those years never left him. By his teens, Mark was drowning in rage. He found an outlet on the streets, as where fighting became his language. In nightclubs, in alleys, anywhere someone wanted to test him, Hunt was ready. His fists carried an almost supernatural force. Stories spread of him dropping grown men with a single punch. Then one late night outside a nightclub, fate intervened. Hunt flattened multiple men in a brawl, but one of the bouncers saw something else in him: raw, untapped power. Instead of calling the cops, the bouncer gave Mark a lifeline, an invitation to train at his gym. That invitation saved him. Hunt found structure in Muay Thai and then in kickboxing. He wasn't just a street brawler anymore, he was a fighter. By 2001, he shocked the world by winning the prestigious K1 World Grand Prix, defeating the best strikers on the planet with his granite chin and knockout power. The man who once fought in parking lots was now the king of kickboxing. 3 years later, he moved to MMA. In Japan's Pride Fighting Championship, Hunt stood across from legends like Wanderlei Silva and Mirko Cro Cop, and he beat them. Fans loved him not just for the knockouts, but for his attitude. He was calm, funny, unshakable. A man who carried violence with a shrug. By 2010, he entered the UFC. The early years were rough. He lost 6 straight at one point, but then came the resurgence. From 2011 to 2014, Hunt went on a tear, knocking out giants like Roy Nelson and Stefan Struve, and even fought for the interim heavyweight title against Fabricio Werdum. His walk-off knockouts, where he would land the final blow and casually stroll away before his opponent hit the mat, became iconic. Alex Pereira, from tire shop to double champ. Alex Pereira's journey begins in São Bernardo do Campo, Brazil, where he was born in 1987. His childhood was rough from the start. Money was scarce, opportunities even scarcer. By age 12, school was already a lost cause. Instead, Alex was working in a tire shop, inhaling fumes and grease, just trying to help his family survive. But alongside the grind came something darker. In that neighborhood, drinking wasn't a weekend escape, it was culture. Alex fell deep into it. By his own words, as a teenager, he was drinking a bottle of liquor a day. Alcohol nearly consumed him before fighting ever did. At 22, he walked into a kickboxing gym, desperate for change. That decision saved his life. The discipline of striking gave him purpose, structure, and an outlet. He was raw but gifted. The power in his left hook was different. It didn't just hurt, it ended fights. From there, he tore through Brazil's kickboxing scene, then the world. He became a 2-division Glory kickboxing champion, cementing himself as one of the deadliest strikers alive. Along the way, he crossed paths with another rising striker, Israel Adesanya. Not once but twice, Pereira beat him in the ring, first by decision, then with a brutal knockout. That rivalry was planted long before the UFC ever called. But kickboxing didn't pay the bills, so Pereira made the leap to MMA in 2015. His transition wasn't flawless. He lost his second fight, but by 2020, after a highlight reel flying knee in LFA, the UFC signed him. He walked into the octagon with 2 shadows behind him, his devastating reputation and his unfinished business with Adesanya. What happened next was one of the fastest rises in UFC history. In just his 4th UFC fight, Pereira met Adesanya again, this time for the middleweight title. For 4 rounds, Izzy outpointed him, but in the 5th, Pereira marched forward with the same cold power that carried him from the streets of Brazil. A left hook, a flurry, and Israel Adesanya collapsed. The man who started in a tire shop was now UFC middleweight champion. He didn't stop there. Months later, he moved up to light heavyweight and knocked out Jiří Procházka to become the fastest fighter ever to hold 2 UFC belts. In less than 2 years, Pereira went from fringe prospect to double champion. What makes Pereira's story so gripping isn't just the gold, it's the contradictions. A man of few words, but with fists that speak volumes. A once broken teenager drowning in alcohol, now the most feared striker in MMA. Jose Aldo, from the streets of Manaus to featherweight king. Jose Aldo was born in 1986 in Manaus, Brazil, deep in the Amazon, where poverty pressed down like the heat. His family had almost nothing. Food on the table was never guaranteed, and survival was the only real priority. Even as a baby, fate didn't spare him. During a heated family argument, his sister accidentally threw his crib, with Aldo still inside, onto a barbecue pit. The burn scarred his face forever. As he grew, life didn't get easier. His mother eventually left, and his father, a bricklayer who worked long hours, raised Jose and his siblings. There was never enough money, but there was always Aldo's dream. At first, it was soccer. Like every Brazilian kid, he wanted to kick his way out of poverty, but fights on the street began to take over. He realized he didn't just like fighting, he was good at it. At 13, he started training, first scraps in the streets, then real technique and Brazilian jiu-jitsu. His talent was obvious, but Manaus was too small for his ambition. At 17, with almost no money and nowhere to stay, he left for Rio de Janeiro. He arrived with little more than his training gear and slept on gym floors, surviving on scraps and grit. That gamble paid off. Aldo tore through Brazil's regional MMA scene before catching the eye of the UFC, then the premier home for lighter weight fighters. His speed, precision, and devastating leg kicks turned him into a highlight machine. By 2009, he was WEC featherweight champion, knocking out Mike Brown and putting away Uriah Faber with leg kicks so brutal fans still wince at the replay. When the WEC merged into the UFC in 2010, Aldo became the inaugural UFC featherweight champion, and he didn't let go. For over 5 years, he defended that belt against the best in the world: Chad Mendes, Frankie Edgar, Kenny Florian, Ricardo Lamas. His reign was dominance. But Aldo's story is remembered not just for his victories, but also for his fall. In December 2015, he stepped in against Conor Mcgregor, the brash Irishman who had turned their fight into the biggest spectacle MMA had ever seen. After 13 years unbeaten, Aldo was knocked out in 13 seconds. The image of him flat on the canvas became one of the most replayed moments in UFC history.